The morning I found out, I was standing in my kitchen in my robe, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no music, no warning. Just me, my phone, and a notification from my bank that made my hand go still. A charge of $622 at a place called Maison Laurent. I had never heard of it. I had certainly never been there. I set my coffee down on the counter very carefully, the way you do when you're trying to keep yourself from doing something you'll regret. Then I opened the full statement, and I just stood there and read. I want to tell you something about my daughter-in-law before I get into what happened. I want you to understand that I didn't always feel the way I came to feel. There was a time, not so long ago really, when I thought she was exactly what my son needed. She was organized where he was scattered. She was decisive where he hesitated. When they got married 7 years ago, I danced at their wedding with genuine joy in my chest. I mean that. Her name is Melissa. She's 34 years old, and she has very good taste. That last part turned out to be relevant. My son's name is Daniel. He's my youngest, 36 now, and he has always been the kind of person who assumes things will work out. Not in a lazy way. He works hard, he always has, but he tends to trust the people around him to handle the details. He trusted Melissa with that. And for a long time, I trusted her too. The card had started as a practical thing. 2 years ago, Daniel called me on a Sunday afternoon and explained that they were in a tight spot. He'd had a gap between freelance contracts. Melissa's hours had been cut at the firm where she worked, and a medical bill had come through that insurance hadn't fully covered. He was embarrassed to ask. I could hear it in his voice, that particular kind of shame that children carry when they have to come to a parent for help, even as adults. I told him not to be silly. I added him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. It had a $5,000 limit, which felt reasonable. I told him it was for emergencies, for the tight months, and that we'd figure out the rest as we went. He thanked me the way he used to thank me when he was small, too many times. Like he was afraid once wasn't enough. What I did not do, and I want to be honest about this because the comments on videos like this always bring it up, was check my statements carefully after that. I have autopay set up. I am 63 years old and I have been paying bills since before some of you were born. And somewhere along the way, I got into the habit of seeing the total and paying it without reading every line. I trusted my son, so I paid what the bank told me to pay and I didn't ask questions. That was my mistake. I own it fully, but here is what I found when I finally looked. Over the 14 months since I'd added Daniel to the card, there had been $11,400 in charges I didn't recognize. Not all at once. That's not how it works. It was $180 here, $340 there, $95 at a spa I'd never been to, $1,200 at a resort hotel 2 states away during a weekend I'd been told they were visiting his college roommate. Drip by drip, the way water damages a foundation. Slow enough that no single charge sets off an alarm. Fast enough that the total, when you finally see it all laid out, takes your breath away. $11,400. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I cried. Not from sadness exactly. It was more complicated than that. It was grief, I think. Grief for the version of things I had believed in. I want to pause here and tell you what I did and didn't do next, because I think it matters. I did not call Daniel immediately. I know that might surprise you. I know some of you would have picked up the phone in the first 5 minutes. But I have lived long enough to know that the conversations you have in the first hour after a shock like that are almost never the conversations you actually want to have. You say things from the wound instead of from the truth, and those words don't go back in. I had made that mistake before years ago in a different situation, and I had spent a long time making up for it, so instead, I printed the statement, all 14 months of it. I highlighted every charge I didn't make myself. I made a list, line by line, of what had been spent and where. And then I went for a walk around the block in my robe, which is not a thing I normally do, and I let myself feel what I was feeling before I decided what to do about it. What I was feeling, underneath the grief, was something harder to name. It was the particular humiliation of having been managed, because I kept thinking about the conversations, about the times Daniel had said things were getting better, About the Christmas where Melissa had worn a coat I'd never seen before that looked expensive. About the trip they'd taken to Scottsdale in January that they'd said was a work thing for Melissa's firm. I kept thinking about how I had nodded and smiled and believed them, and how they had looked at each other in that way. Couples do when they're sharing a private understanding. I had been kept comfortable so that I would stay quiet. I called my older daughter that evening. Her name is Patricia, and she is the person I trust most in the world. I asked her to come over, and I showed her the printed statement without saying anything first. I watched her read it. I watched her face go through the same stages mine had, just faster. She looked up at me and said, "Mom, how long has this been going on?" I told her 14 months. She put the papers down very carefully on the table, which told me she was also trying not to do something she'd regret. We talked for 2 hours that night. Patricia wanted me to call Daniel right then. I understand why. She's protective, and she was angry on my behalf, and rightfully so. But I kept thinking about the timing. I didn't want a phone call where he could manage the conversation. I didn't want apologies delivered from a safe distance with time to prepare. I wanted to see his face. More than that, I wanted to understand how much of this he actually knew and how much he had let happen without looking too closely, because looking closely was uncomfortable. I had a feeling, and I was right about this as it turned out, that the answer was somewhere complicated. We made a plan. I would not alert them. I would not freeze the card yet. I would wait for the right moment, and when that moment came, I would be ready. I didn't have to wait long. Daniel called me 4 days later to say that he and Melissa were having a small dinner at their house the following Saturday. Just a few of Melissa's friends from work and her sister, nothing big. And would I like to come? He said it casually, the way he always does, like an afterthought. He said Melissa was making that pasta I liked. I said I would love to come. I did not tell Patricia about the invitation because I knew she would want to be there, and I didn't want the evening to become a confrontation. What I wanted was information. I wanted to walk into that house and watch how they lived and see what 14 months of my money had been furnishing. I brought a bottle of wine. I dressed nicely. I smiled when Melissa opened the door. The apartment looked different from the last time I'd been there, maybe 8 months before. There was a new sectional sofa in the living room, a deep charcoal gray with clean lines, the kind that costs what a month's rent used to cost. There was a piece of art on the wall above it, abstract, framed properly, the kind of frame that adds another few $100s to whatever the canvas cost. The kitchen had a new coffee machine, one of those Italian ones that sits on the counter like a piece of sculpture. I noticed all of it. I smiled and said the apartment looked lovely. Melissa accepted the compliment the way she accepts most things, smoothly and without excess. She said they'd done some updates. I sat in her beautiful living room and I drank a glass of wine and I had a conversation with her colleague about a television show I'd never seen. And I watched my son move through his apartment with the ease of a man who is comfortable in his life. And I thought about every charge on that statement, the spa visits, the hotel weekend, the restaurant charges, one of which, I had looked it up, was the kind of place where the prix-fixe menu starts at $200 a person. I stayed for 2 hours. I helped clear the plates. I hugged my son at the door and told him I'd had a lovely time. In my car, before I started the engine, I took my phone out and I looked up Maison Laurent. It was a French restaurant about 12 minutes from their apartment. The reviews described it as intimate and elegant. The tasting menu was listed at $195 per person, not including wine. I put my phone away and I drove home. I called my bank the next morning. I want to explain what I did and why because this is the part people ask about. I did not close the card. I did not close the card. I did not call Daniel. What I did was set up real-time alerts on every transaction over $50, which I should have done years ago and simply hadn't thought to do. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. On a Tuesday evening, 11 days after the dinner party, my phone buzzed with an alert. A charge of $438 at Maison Laurent. It was $7,042 in the evening. I sat with that notification for a moment. I thought about my son eating a tasting menu at a restaurant I had never been invited to, on a card I had given him for emergencies, while I was at home eating leftover soup. I picked up my phone and I called the bank. I told them I wanted to freeze the card immediately. The representative asked me to confirm a few details. I confirmed them. She told me it was done. I thanked her, hung up, and set my phone face down on the coffee table. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I think people sometimes expect it to feel triumphant, like a scene in the movie. It didn't feel like that. It felt quiet. It felt like the moment after you've made a decision that can't be unmade, when the relief and the sadness arrive at exactly the same time, and you sit with both of them and don't try to decide which one is more appropriate. I turned on the television and watched the rest of a nature documentary I'd had on before the alert came through. I watched it until 10 o'clock. Then I went to bed. My phone rang at 8:17 the following morning. It was Daniel. He asked how I was doing in the way people do when they are about to say something else. I told him I was fine, thank you. There was a brief pause, and then he said that something strange had happened the night before. His card had been declined at dinner, which was embarrassing, and when he called the bank, they told him the account was frozen, and he wasn't sure what was going on. And had I done anything with the account recently? I said yes. I had frozen the card. Another pause. Longer this time. He asked why. I told him I'd like to talk about it in person, and would he and Melissa be able to come over on Saturday morning? He said, of course, and his voice had shifted into something careful, the way voices do when the person speaking has started to understand what's coming. I spent the rest of the week getting ready, not emotionally. I was as ready as I was going to be, but practically. I organized the printed statement into a folder. I wrote down the total, the timeline, and a short list of specific charges I wanted to discuss. I did not rehearse what I was going to say, because I have learned that rehearsed conversations tend to go wrong in the exact place where reality doesn't match the script. They arrived at 10 in the morning. Daniel had brought pastries from a bakery, which was the kind of thing he always did, trying to make things easier with small gestures. I put them on a plate and made coffee, and we sat down at the kitchen table. I let the silence settle for just a moment, and then I opened the folder and set it in the middle of the table. I said, I want to go over some charges on the account we share. I've had real-time alerts set up for the past few weeks, and I've also gone back through the last 14 months. I'd like to understand what happened. Melissa looked at the folder without touching it. Her expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes shifted. A very quick recalculation, the kind you can see if you've been watching people long enough. Daniel picked up the folder. I watched him read. His face told me what I needed to know. He wasn't discovering this information. He was reckoning with the fact that I had discovered it. Those are different experiences, and they look different on a person's face. He set the folder down. He said, Mom. I raised my hand gently, not harshly. I said, Let me finish first, then you can talk. I told him what I had found. $11,400 over 14 months. I named specific charges. I mentioned the resort weekend, which they had told me was a visit to his college roommate. I mentioned the tasting menus, the spa visits, the coat, the coffee machine, the piece of art on their wall. I mentioned that the emergency I had provided the card for had apparently resolved itself fairly quickly, and that I wished they had told me when that happened. I told them I was not asking them to explain themselves. I was telling them what I knew, and I was telling them that the card was closed, and I was telling them that I expected to be repaid in full on a schedule we would agree to before they left that morning. Then I stopped talking, and I waited. Melissa spoke first. She said the charges had gotten out of hand, and that she was sorry if I'd been put in an uncomfortable position, and that they had always intended to bring the balance down when things stabilized. She said it in the tone of a person accustomed to managing conversations, measured and slightly above the situation, like she was acknowledging a misunderstanding rather than a betrayal. I looked at her for a moment without saying anything. Then I said, Melissa, I'm not uncomfortable, I'm clear. There's a difference. She didn't say anything after that. Daniel was the one who broke. Not loudly, he was never a loud person, but I could see him coming apart at the edges the way he used to when he was small and had done something he knew was wrong and was waiting for me to confirm how wrong it was. He said he was sorry. He said he had known how to say anything and that things had escalated in a way that got away from him and that he was sorry and that the last thing he wanted was to hurt me. I believed him about not knowing how to stop it. I believed him less about not knowing it was wrong. I told him I believed he was sorry. I also told him that sorry and accountable are not the same word, and that I loved him too much to let him treat them like they were. We sat at that table for another hour and a half. By the end of it, we had a written repayment agreement, $400 a month until the balance was settled, starting the first of the following month. Melissa's name was on it too. I had them both sign it. When they left, Daniel hugged me at the door for a long time, longer than usual. I hugged him back. I am still his mother. That part doesn't change. I closed the door and I stood in my hallway for a minute, just breathing. I called Patricia. I told her it was done. She asked me how I felt. I thought about it for a moment, honestly, the way she deserves. I told her I felt like I had chosen clarity over comfort and that it was the right choice, even though it hadn't felt good in the way I might have hoped. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You always said the hardest conversations are the ones that actually move things forward." She was right. I had said that. I think I had believed it in theory for a long time before I had to prove it in practice. It's been 4 months since that morning. The first 2 payments came on time. Daniel and I have had 3 dinners together since then. Just the 2 of us, which hasn't happened in years. We talk differently now. More carefully, more honestly. The way people talk when they know that comfortable silence has a cost. Melissa and I are polite. We may get to something more than that eventually. I'm not in a hurry. What I want to tell you, if you're watching this and you're in a situation where someone you love has been taking advantage of your generosity, is this: the card I gave my son was an act of love. That's still true. It didn't stop being true because it was misused. What changed was what I did next. I stopped paying for the comfort of not knowing. That's a different kind of cost, and it was one I had been choosing without realizing it. When I finally chose differently, something shifted, not just in the practical situation, but in how I stood in my own life. I check my statements now, every month, every line. I have alerts set on every account. Not because I don't trust people, but because I understand now that oversight isn't suspicion, it's responsibility. It's the thing I owe to myself before I can offer anything real to anyone else. If you've been carrying something like this quietly, I hope this helps you feel a little less alone in it. And I hope you find your Saturday morning, the one where you sit down at the table, open the folder, and choose clarity. It's worth it. I promise you, it's worth it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this story moved you in any way, please leave a comment below. I genuinely read every single one. Subscribe to Sophia's Family Stories if you're new here, and come back soon. There's always another story worth telling.